Welcome to my bloody love letter. This is my love letter to all things horror. It's the beginning, hopefully, of many episodes celebrating what might just be my greatest passion horror movies. For me, like so many others, it all started with a childhood trauma. In my case, that trauma came in the form of a movie called House on Haunted Hill, starring Vincent Price. These days, it's known for its campiness and dark humor. But back then, it scared the hell out of me. My young mind couldn't comprehend why anyone would create a story just to scare you, to traumatize you, to keep you up at night. But there's an allure. For those of us who keep going beyond that first scare, something happens. We begin to enjoy that feeling, the anticipation, the adrenaline. We know it's coming, hopefully, if the film is done right. It's fear, but it's also excitement. And it all happens in a controlled environment. It could be your home or a theater, places where even though something terrifying is happening on screen, you're safe. Horror lets you explore your fears and neuroses without actual danger. It's cathartic. These films, they can linger and they can leave a lasting impact, whether it's psychological horror or just straight out blood and guts gore. They all provoke something. They make you feel something. That's the journey I want to take you on. And maybe along the way, give you a little insight into why I love this genre. Now, maybe here's a question. Am I sick? Am I disturbed? Depraved? Am I all three? Yeah, probably. I might be a lost cause, but after decades of loving horror, I still get excited about it. I still feel affection for all its many forms classic, obscure, psychological, brutal, beautiful. This might all sound like a ramble, but I just wanted to explain why I'm doing this. But most importantly, this is a gift, I guess, for my wife. When I talk about horror here, I'm really talking to her. She's always supported me in this passion, even though it's not something she grew up with or even fully understands. She indulged my obsession with curiosity and patience. So I thought, what better way to share this with her than through a podcast? Not to educate, but to guide her through the genre that's meant so much to me. And maybe along the way, I'll get some insight about myself and maybe understand myself a little better. So bear with me. This is my first podcast and my very first episode. I wanted to get this little preamble out of the way so we can move forward. This is my bloody love letter. A love letter to my wife and a love letter to the horror I hold dear. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it inspires you to check out some of the films I talk about. And maybe, just maybe, spark some conversations of your own. So with that, let's begin. My bloody love letter. So for this first episode, and actually for the next few episodes, I've decided to begin with a time period that was probably the most impactful to me because it happened to be when I grew up, the 1980s. Now, I know there's already a mountain of material out there about 80s horror, but I wanted to start here because these were my formative years. Even though my first horror experience was back in the 70s, it was in the 80s when I truly knew I was a horror fan. And with that came all the experiences that so many of us remember, walking through the video store aisles, catching something late night on TV, probably heavily edited, but still awesome. So that's where I want to start. So I've put together a top 20 list of 1980s horror films that mean the most to me. Films that reflect my tastes at the time and the movies from that era I still watch today. But before we dive in, I set myself a few ground rules. 3. So, rule 1, the movie had to be released in the 80s. So, anywhere between the year 1980 and the year 1989. Rule 2, only one film per director, with one exception. I'm calling this the Carpenter rule. John gets a pass, and for reasons I'll explain when we get there. Rule 3, only one entry per franchise. If I love a series, I'll pick the one installment that's most personal to me, even if it's not the obvious choice. And that's it. So let's get started with my top 20 list of 80s horror films. This episode begins shortly with number 20.
60 years ago, everybody in this hotel disappeared. Every last person. A painter called Svein, who lived here, closeted in his room, had found a key. What key? The 7 gateways to hell.
So, today, for number 20, we're going to dive deep into one of Italian horror's most enigmatic and surreal entries. And I'm talking about Lucio Fulci's The Beyond from 1981. This is not your typical zombie film. It's kind of a fever dream that abandons traditional storytelling in favor of pure nightmare logic. We'll explore how Fulci created one of horror cinema's most disorienting experiences through what he called absolute film. So picture this. You're watching a horror movie, but halfway through, you realize the rules have changed. Characters move through impossible spaces, time becomes fluid, and events unfold with the logic of nightmares rather than any kind of narrative sense. That's kind of what The Beyond is. It's a film that dares to abandon everything we expect from storytelling to create something genuinely unsettling. So, what is The Beyond? Well, I guess we'll tell whatever story is theirs. So, let's begin. The Beyond tells the story of Liza Merrill, who inherits a Louisiana hotel built over the 7 gateways to hell. But here's the thing. That plot description is almost irrelevant to the actual experience of watching the film. Fulci uses this premise as a launching pad for something far stranger. This film, The Beyond, is the middle film in what was called kind of the unofficial Gates of Hell trilogy. It was sandwiched between City of the Living Dead and The House by the Cemetery. In each of these films, it deals with a supernatural breach between the worlds. But The Beyond pushes the furthest into the abstract. So, unlike typical horror films that build suspense through plot, The Beyond creates unease through pure atmosphere and impossible imagery. So I mentioned earlier about Fulci calling this film, but a number of his films, an approach that he described as absolute film. And basically, what he meant by that was cinema that communicates through pure visual experience rather than traditional narrative. Think of it as kind of like a abstract painting versus realistic portraiture, where most horror films are like realistic paintings showing you recognizable situations that gradually become threatening. The Beyond is abstract art that hits you on an emotional level before your brain can even process what the heck is happening. This philosophy of absolute film explains why it feels so different from other horror movies. Fulci wasn't interested in making you jump, or he wasn't interested in building suspense through plot twists. He wanted to create the cinematic equivalent of a nightmare, something that bypasses rational thought and taps directly into your primal fears. Now, this approach, especially for the time, was kind of revolutionary for horror cinema, and it paved the way for later surreal horror films. But before we dive into the surreal aspects, let's try to establish what the Beyond is actually about on a surface level. The alleged plot. Because understanding the basic story makes the dream logic elements even more striking. So, the film opens in 1927 Louisiana, where a lynch mob tortures and kills Schweik, a painter staying at the Seven Doors Hotel. They believe he's a warlock who's opened one of the 7 gateways to hell. And Schweik is crucified. He has his face dissolved with acid, and he's walled up alive in the hotel's basement. A brutal sequence that establishes the supernatural threat lurking beneath the hotel. Flash forward to 1981. We have Liza Merrill, a young woman from New York who inherits this same hotel, the Seven Doors Hotel, and arrives in Louisiana to renovate it and start fresh. She's immediately warned by locals to stay away. But like any good horror protagonist, she ignores these warnings. The hotel is kind of a decaying southern Gothic mansion that feels wrong right from the moment we see it. Now, enter Emily, a mysterious blind woman who lives nearby with her German shepherd. Emily knows the hotel's dark history and tries to warn Liza, but speaks in cryptic riddles about the beyond and doorways that shouldn't be opened. She's our prophet of doom. But like all protagonists, her warnings go unheeded. The supernatural activity begins with small, strange sounds, unexplained accidents, workers getting injured in bizarre ways, and but when Liza's renovations disturb Schweik's walled-up corpse in the basement, all hell literally begins to break loose. The dead start rising, reality becomes unstable, and the hotel transforms into a supernatural battleground. Dr. John McCabe, a local physician, becomes Liza's ally and potential love interest. And together they must survive as the hotel reveals its true nature. Not just a building, but a literal gateway between our world and a realm of eternal torment. But here's where Fulci subverts expectations. This plot setup is just the framework. What follows isn't a traditional survival horror story, but something far stranger and much more nightmarish. The Beyond tells the story of Liza Merrill inheriting a Louisiana hotel built over one of 7 gateways to hell. But here's the thing. That plot description is almost irrelevant to the actual experience of watching the film. Fulci uses this premise as a launching pad for something far stranger. Now, this is the middle film in Fulci's unofficial Gates of Hell trilogy. It's sandwiched between City of the Living Dead and The House by the Cemetery. And each film deals with supernatural breaches between worlds. But the Beyond pushes furthest into abstract territory. Unlike typical horror films that build suspense through plot, The Beyond creates unease through pure atmosphere and impossible imagery. Fulci described his approach as absolute film, which is cinema that communicates through pure visual experience rather than traditional narrative. Think of it like abstract painting versus realistic portraiture, where most horror films are like realistic paintings, showing you recognizable situations that gradually become more threatening. The Beyond is abstract art that hits you on an emotional level before your brain can even process what's happening. This philosophy of absolute film explains why the film feels so different from other horror movies. Fulci wasn't interested in making you jump or building suspense through plot twists. He wanted to create the cinematic equivalent of a nightmare, something that bypasses rational thought and taps directly into primal fears. This approach was revolutionary for horror cinema, and it paved the way for later surreal and abstract horror films. The hotel in The Beyond doesn't follow real world architectural rules. Corridors stretch endlessly, rooms appear where they shouldn't exist, and the basement becomes a gateway to multiple otherworldly locations. This isn't continuity errors, it's intentional. It's dream geography. Just like in dreams, we accept these spatial impossibilities while experiencing them. The basement connects to Louisiana swamplands and ancient crypts and otherworldly voids without any logical transitions. Fulci forces us to navigate space the way dreamers do, through emotional association rather than physical logic. The 1927 prologue with Schweik's torture and death just isn't backstory, it bleeds into the present timeline. Past traumas manifest literally in the contemporary narrative. Emily, the blind woman, exists as a temporal anchor, simultaneously present in multiple time periods. Notice how certain images repeat through the film with variations. Eye trauma, water and flooding, people being pulled into otherworldly spaces. This repetition within variation mirrors how our subconscious works through anxieties and dreams. Characters in The Beyond don't behave like real people. They act like figures in dreams. Liza continues renovating the hotel despite mounting supernatural evidence, not because she's stupid, but because dreams often persist in pursuing goals even as reality collapses around them. Supporting characters appear and disappear like dream figures. We got Joe the plumber, Martin the architect, and even Dr. Harris. They serve specific symbolic functions rather than existing as fully developed people. They represent different aspects of rational, everyday life being invaded by the irrational. This approach makes the film more unsettling because we can't predict character behavior using normal psychological rules. Fulci creates a visual language that operates below conscious understanding. We've got eyes, So, recurring eye trauma represents the destruction of rational perception. We've got water. Persistent flooding suggests overwhelming chaos breaking through. We've got books. The Book of Abon appears when dramatically needed, regardless of plot logic. We've got doorways. Constant imagery of thresholds between normal and supernatural realms. The famous ending abandons literal reality entirely. Characters walk through a landscape borrowed through kind of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, a visual metaphor for damnation that acknowledges its own artificiality while maintaining emotional impact. So let's talk kind of about the technical craft in the supporting of this surrealism. We got Sergio Salvati's camera work that creates oppressive and humid atmosphere that makes viewers feel trapped in the nightmare alongside the characters. The visual style transforms Italian locations into convincing Southern Gothic environments through pure cinematic alchemy. And the sound design. The audio landscape contributes significantly to the dreamlike quality. Dialogue often feels disconnected from speakers. Voices echo impossibly, and ambient sounds intrude without clear sources. Fabio Frizzi's synthesizer score creates beauty during violent scenes, producing the emotional disconnection common in dreams. So, let's talk about the initial critical reception, as well as the legacy. Initially, it was dismissed by critics who expected traditional narrative horror. The Beyond has undergone significant reevaluation. Modern critics recognize its intentionally avant-garde approach and its influence on contemporary surreal horror. The film proved that horror could be effectively disorienting through pure visual and emotional assault rather than suspense building. When viewers can't predict what's coming because the film doesn't allow logical rules, conventional defense mechanisms become useless. You can see the Beyond's DNA in recent films like Mandy or Color Out of Space, and for that matter, even some of David Lynch's works. All films that prioritize impossible imagery over logical storytelling. So, there's a few questions, I suppose, that could be asked about The Beyond. Does the lack of traditional plot structure make The Beyond more or less effective as horror? And how does experiencing dream logic cinema differ from conventional narrative films? The Beyond stands as proof that horror cinema can push beyond conventional storytelling to create genuinely unique experiences. Fulci's willingness to abandon narrative logic in favor of pure nightmare imagery created something that still feels fresh and unsettling over 40 years later. Whether you love it or hate it, The Beyond demands to be experienced rather than simply watched. It's horror as a fever dream, cinema as nightmare, and that's exactly what Fulci intended. And with that, we reach the end of tonight's bloody little chapter. If you made it this far, thank you, truly, for walking with me into the shadows. I know horror isn't just about scares, it's about connection and memory, and sometimes even comfort in the darkness. And that's why I do this, and that's why I'm so grateful. This podcast, this whole strange project, is at its heart a love letter. A love letter to horror, yes, but more than that. It's dedicated to my beautiful wife. My whole universe, really. Every scream, every monster, every haunted whisper you hear is my way of showing her the strange and wonderful world that shaped me. If tonight's episode spoke to you, if it stirred some nostalgia, gave you chills, or just made you smile at the madness of it all, I'd love for you to share it. I appreciate you. So until we meet again, keep your candles lit, keep your doors locked, and keep your heart open to the shadows. Because in the end, the things that frighten us most are also the things that remind us we're alive. This has been my bloody love letter, and thanks for listening. Remember, love is eternal, but so are the things that go bump